If you have been watching my YouTube videos, you will know that when it comes to off-shoulder dress, I am really good at it. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you the easiest way to cut off-shoulder with a side pocket and this exaggerated sleeve right here. I'm going to be recreating exactly what we have on the thumbnail, and I will also be sewing the belt for this particular dress. The only reason why I'm not wearing this is because it's not mine. If I was the owner, I would have worn it so that you can see exactly what it looks like on me. But trust me, if you have your exact body measurement, that is the accurate body measurement, then you should be able to recreate this. So right here I have 3 yards of fabric. Please, nothing less than 3 yards. If you're a plus size, then maybe 4-5 yards. So the first thing I did was, on the plain piece of paper, I'm going to be drafting the off shoulder. And the first thing I'm going to be marking is my chest line measurements. So her chest line is 8.5, her bust line is 10.5, her under bust line is 14 inches, while her waistline is 17. But for the sake of today's tutorial, I'm going to be using 16.5. And the reason is because I'm going to be using the same measurement for the back, and I don't want any budginess at that point. So I'm going to be recreating exactly what we have on the other side of the paper, and I'll be drawing a straight line like this. So after drawing a straight line, the next thing I'm going to do is, you're going to go ahead and label the lines so that you will not get confused when you are drafting. And then after that, you're going to divide your shoulder by 2. Her shoulder is 15, dividing it by 2, that's 7.5. So I'm going to mark it on the chest line as well. And then from this point, I go down by 1 inch, and I'll connect it to the chest line like this. So after that, the next thing I'm going to do is, on the neckline, that is that neck width, I'm going to be marking my neck width of 3 inches point, and I'm going to connect it to that 1 inch point like this, and this will be the shoulder for this dress. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm dividing this line by 2, and I'll go in by 1/2 inch, and from this point I'm going to mark quarter of her bust measurements. I'll divide it by, that is, I'll divide her bust measurement by 4, and I'll mark it there. Then after marking it, I'll just go ahead and use my front curve and connect it from the shoulder through the 1/2 inch point all the way to the bust measurements like this. So with this, we have successfully drawn the armhole, although we are not going to be using this armhole, but this is what we have for now. So the next thing we're going to do is, from the bust line, I'm going to go up by 1 inch. So you can go more than 1 inch depending on how low you want it to be. While on the other side, I'm going to go up by 2.5 inches close to the armhole area. So after that, I'll use my front curve to connect it from the armhole all the way to the center front. And with this, we have successfully drawn the sweetheart neckline. However, if you use it like this, it's going to be too big. So in order to make it relax on the body, we're going to be taking the measurement from one bra strap to the next, as shown. So after you take that measurement, for her, I got 9 inches. So I'm going to divide it by 2, that is 4.5. And I'll be marking the 4.5 inches there. I'll also add 1/2 inch for sewing allowance right there. And then after that, the next thing, from the chest line, I'll go down by 1/2 inch like this. And with my front curve, I'm going to connect from the neckline point all the way to the 0.5 inch that we went down by. So with this, we have gotten the new armhole that we'll be using for this off shoulder. After that, the next thing we're going to do is, on the under bust area, I'm going to be marking quarter of my my round bust measurement. So make sure you take your round bust and then you divide it by 4 and mark it there. The reason why we are using this measurement is because we want it to be fitted around the under bust area, okay? So while on the waistline, I will take quarter of my waist measurement and I'll mark it right there. So remember, this is a dartless pattern, so we are not going to be adding any darts to it. I'm just trying to recreate exactly what we have on the thumbnail. So with this, I'll be drawing a straight line, connecting it from the waistline through the under bust all the way to the chest line point at that 1/2 inch point. Make sure you label the parts that will be on fold so that when we are cutting on the fabric, we'll know how to place it. Then while on this remaining part of the pattern paper. So you take your rule and you measure from the shoulder all the way to that neckline point. So what I got is about 5.5 inches. So I'll be timesing 5.5 by 2, which is about 11 inches. So the length of the elastic that I'll be using for the dress will be 11 inches. Okay, and I times it by 2 because we are using for both the back and the front. So now I'm going to be placing my pattern paper on the fabric like this, and I'll be placing it on fold. I'll make sure the fabric is on fold and I'll pin it down. So after pinning it down, I'm going to be cutting. So for the side seam, remember to add 1 inch for sewing allowance, or 1.5 inch. And then while on the waistline, you use half an inch. On the neckline, you use half an inch. But on the armhole area, you're not going to be using any sewing allowance. Then after that, I'm going to be placing the pattern paper back to its original position so that I'll be able to use it to cut for the back. So if you pay attention, the back neckline has elastic. So in order to recreate that style, I'm going to be connecting from the armhole right there all the way to the center front, drawing a straight line like this. So I'll also remember to connect the armhole from that point all the way to the half an inch point, and I'll cut it out. So after that, this is what we have for the back. And then another thing we're going to do is from the center front, I'm going to go in by 0.5 inch on the waistline point, and I'll connect it like this. And with this, I'll be cutting off the excess. This is just to ensure that there's no bulginess at the back by the time we are done on that zipper area. So now I've gone ahead to cut, and I added 1 inch for zipper allowance, half an inch for the neckline, half an inch for the waistline points, and then 1 inch for the side seam. I have another piece of fabric here that I'll be using for the down part of the dress, that is the skirt part. So I'll draw a straight line from the edge of the fabric, and from that straight line I'm going to go down by 8.5, which is going to be my hip line measurement. And I'll also mark the length of the dress that I want. So from the waistline to where I want this dress to stop is 20 inches. So I'll mark it there, and I'll connect it drawing a straight line like this. So after that, the next thing we're going to do is remember to add 1 inch for sewing allowance, that is the hemline sewing allowance. Okay, then on the waistline points, I'm going to divide my waist by 4, and I'll mark it there, and remember to add your sewing allowance as well. While on the hip line points, I'll divide my hip by 4, and I'll mark 1 inch for sewing allowance. While on the hemline, I'm going to minus 1.5 inch from quarter of my waist measure, or quarter of my hip measurement. So quarter of my hip measurement is 9.5 minus 1.5, that is 8 inches. Then I'll add 1 inch extra for sewing allowance, and I'll connect it, drawing that pencil effect that you can see on the dress. So I'll connect it also to the waistline like this, but I'm going to be trying to curve it a little bit from the waistline all the way to the hip points. And I'll also extend the waistline to about half an inch, which will be the sewing allowance. Okay, then with this you are going to cut it out. I'm going to be placing this same pattern on another piece of fabric to cut for the back, but the only difference is that the back I'm going to be adding zipper allowance, and I'm not going to be cutting on fold. So you just cut exactly what you have in front, you cut it for the back. And then for the center front, that is the center back, you're going to go in by, you're going to mark half an inch on this point, and then you connect it to 1 inch on the hip line. And then from the hip line, I'll go in by half an inch from about 8 inches away from the hip line. I'll go in by half an inch, and I'll connect it to the hip line like this. And then after that, I'll cut the remaining part of it out. And with it, by the time we are sewing it, it's going to relax very well around our butt. So the next thing now is for the pockets, and I have two pieces of fabric right here. The length and width of the fabric is as shown and is on fold. This is the front, and this is what it looks like by the time you open it up. We are going to be adding the pockets to the front. So before we do that, we'll place the fabric on fold again, and then you cut out the shape of the skirt onto the pocket. So make sure that the waistline and the hip line is aligned before you cut it out. So exactly what we have on the skirt, we are going to recreate it on the pocket. So after cutting it out, you're going to open it up like this, and you're going to place one fold of the pocket onto the skirt like this. Make sure everything is aligned. And then from here, I'm going to go in by 2.5 inch, while from the hip line, I'm going to go up by 1 inch. I'm going to connect from the 1 inch point all the way to the 2.5 inch point using a straight line, and I'll cut both the skirts and the pockets. That is one side of the pocket. So by the time you're done cutting, this is what it should look like. So I'm going to use this to cut on the other pocket. Remember, we have two pieces for both the left and the right pocket. So exactly what we have here, I'm going to place it on the other pocket and I'll be cutting. Okay, I'll face both of them right side facing each other, and I'll recreate exactly what I have on the first pocket onto the second pocket. So I'll just cut it out like this. So this is what we are going to be using. So now I'll be placing this pocket onto the center front, that is the front of the skirt. So the part that is inside, I'm going to be facing it right side together onto the skirt, and I'll sew using 1 inch sewing allowance. So after sewing, you're going to turn it to the right side. This is what we have, and I've also sewn on the other side of the pocket as well. So exactly what we have for the left one, we have the same thing for the right one. So now I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and I'll understitch it. After understitching it, I'll fold it like this, making sure that I fold it the way I have been folding it. Just fold it back again and just do exactly what I'm doing right now. So make sure the waistline is aligned and the hip line as well is aligned with that of the pocket. Okay, then you now sew on it using 1/2 inch sewing allowance. So after sewing on the hip line and on the waistline, you can also go ahead to close the pocket using 1/2 inch sewing allowance, and you're going to do the same thing on the other side of the pocket as well. So right now I'm done with both sides, and I've secured the waistline and the hip line so that it will not be coming out. Okay, at this point I've also cut the bodice of the dress and I've cut the lining as well. I'll open it up and I will be joining it at the neckline using 1/2 inch sewing allowance. For the back, this is what it looks like. So now you're going to face the lining to the right side, and you're going to sew using 1/2 inch sewing allowance. So at this point I'm done sewing the center front, that is the front of the bodice, and I'll just be notching it open so that I can be able to understitch it and turn it to the right side. So you just turn it this way and understitch on the lining. Then after understitching, you iron it, and this is what you should have, a very clean finish. And then now I'm going to be joining the bodice to the skirt part of the dress. So in order to do that, I will separate the lining from the fabric, and I'll be joining of the bodice to the skirt. Okay, and then when you sew, you use 1/2 inch sewing allowance, and then you turn it to the right side. I'll do the same thing for the back as well. After joining it to the lining, I'm going to be joining it to the skirt part. So make sure the zip area is aligned with the zip area of the bodice, and then you sew. And then the same thing I'm doing for the fabric, I'm doing the same thing for the lining as well. So after that, I'm going to be joining both sides of the back, that is the back and the front together. And from the hip line, I will sew using 1 inch sewing allowance down to about 8 inches points. Okay, so you sew all the way to where you want the slits to start from. So by the time you're done sewing, this is what it should look like. So now we are going to be joining the zip to this dress. So just the way you attach your basic zip to a dress is the same thing you're going to do. So you attach it to only the lining first, and then after you're done joining it to the lining, this is what it should look like. So now I'm going to be joining the lining to the fabric. So just pay attention to how I am folding it. Make sure the zipper allowance is outside, that is at the edge of the fabric, and then you sew all the way to where the zip ends. Okay, so you're going to do the same thing on the other side, and by the time you turn it to the right side, this is what it should look like for the lining. Okay, so after that, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to turn it, face the lining together, and you sew from where you want the slits to start from. You're going to sew all the way to where the zip stops, like where the zip ends. So you use 1 inch sewing allowance and sew to where the zip ends. So after sewing, this is what we have for the back. When you turn it to the wrong side, that is the lining point, this is also what it looks like. So at this point now, I'm just going to be joining the main fabric of the front to that of the back. So you join it from the armhole through the waist all the way to the hemline using 1 inch sewing allowance, or depending on the allowance that you used. You're going to join the lining as well. So the lining of the front, you join it to the lining of the back on both sides. So remember, we have an elastic at the back. If not, the back will not be well relaxed on our body. So we are going to be joining an elastic. So the length of this elastic is 4.5 inches, which is my 9 inches. That is one bra strap to the next divided by 2. That is 4.5. So I'm going to be placing the elastic through the opening there. So I'm going to be joining it at that zipper point. Just sew it in place there. Then you stretch it to the armhole area, and then you sew using 1/2 inch sewing allowance. So you make sure that you are stretching it so that you can be able to get it to the other side by the time you're done sewing, and then you secure it in place. So we are doing it in between the lining and the fabric. Right here I'm just illustrating what it should look like, okay, inside. So you sew it at that zipper line first, and then you now sew using 1/2 inch sewing allowance to the other side, and you'll be stretching it as you're sewing, so that by the time you're done sewing, it's going to go back to that 4.5 inch length. So make sure that after you are done, the length of one armhole to the next should be 9 inches plus 1/2 inch on both sides. That is 10 inches. Okay, so the next thing we are going to be doing is to cut the sleeve for the dress. So for each sleeve, you need nothing less than 1 yard. So you place 1 yard on fold like this. The measurements and the size of each of these fabric is as shown. Remember, this is the pattern that we drafted earlier. So I'm going to be placing the pattern 10 inches away from the place that is on fold. So just measure 10 inches. You can go as far as 11 or 12, but I use 10 inches from this point. So also, you are going to make sure it's 1 inches away from that is the edge of the fabric. So from that 1 inch point, you connect all the way, that is join the armhole all the way to the other side as well. So remember to add 1 inch extra for sewing allowance, and then you connect it. This is the 1 inch that we left, okay, before we placed our pattern. You connect from this point all the way, that is, you slant it as you go all the way to the other side of the fabric, that is the down part of the fabric, like this. And this is basically it for the sleeve. So just go ahead and cut it out like this. So by the time you open it up, this is what it should look like. I'm going to use the same fabric to cut the other sleeve as well. And now I'm going to be hemming that 1 inch that we left. Okay, we're going to hem it. So after hemming it, or before you hem it, measure 10 inches away from the 1 inch point. Just mark 10 inches there, and then you draw a straight line. So this 10 inches point that we are marking is going to be where I'm going to place the second elastic. You know, there are 3 elastic on this sleeve. So the first one is on the armhole point. This is the second elastic. From this new 10 inches, we're going to mark another 10 inches points, and this is where I'm going to be placing the third elastic. So the first elastic will be at the top, the second elastic will be at this point here, and then the third one will be at the down one. So you can use a bias tape to sew, creating a channel through which we are going to pass the elastic, or you can use the same fabric to create the channel. So whichever works for you, just make sure you create a channel that you are going to pass the elastic through. So I've created a channel for the middle parts and for the down part as well, and I've also hemmed that 1 inch that we left, okay, for hemming. So now I'm going to be joining the sleeve to the dress. So in order to do that, I'm going to be placing facing right side together like this, and I'll be joining the armhole of the sleeve to the armhole of the dress. So you're going to join using 1 inch sewing allowance. Remember, we are supposed to use, instead of using 1/2 inch, use 1 inch sewing allowance, so that it can be very fitted at that point, because it's off shoulder and it's elastic. So just use 1 inch, and then you sew from that point all the way to the side seam like this. So when you are sewing, make sure that you leave an opening where you are going to pass the elastic through, okay? So, and then after you pass the elastic through, you can close it later on. So you're going to do the same thing also on the other side again. You're going to join the sleeve, the armhole of the sleeve, to that of the dress. So you're going to sew from the neckline points all the way to the side seam using 1 inch sewing allowance. So after sewing, this is what it looks like. So at the side seam now, if you notice, the side seam of the back, that is for the sleeve, or the side seam of the back is longer than that of the front. So there's no challenge there, just cut off the excess. Make sure that the back and the front, that is the allowance that is left, is equal. So just cut off the excess like this. So if you notice that the front, the armhole of the back is longer or shorter, cut the one that is longer, so that they will be equal. So just arrange it like this, and you cut off the excess. The one that is not equal, just cut it out. Then you sew from this point, skip that point, sew, skip that point, and then sew down. The reason why we are skipping is so that we can be able to pass our elastic through the hole that we created, okay, the channels that we created for the elastic. The length of the elastic is 11 inches. Remember, while we were drafting the pattern, I mentioned that the elastic we are going to be using will be 11 inches, depending on what you got for your own measurement. So mine is 11 inches. So the length of the elastic is 11. So with a bobbin pin, I'm going to pass the elastic through the hole that we created. So just take your time and pass the elastic through the hole until you reach the other side of the armhole point. So after you sew and you pull it out to the other side, you're going to join it together like this, so that it will secure it. and then now you take it to the machine and you sew on it, closing that armhole area that we left open, okay, because we wanted to pass the elastic through it. So you sew and close the other side as well. So the next thing, we're going to do the same thing for this side and this other side as well. So through the hole that we left while we were sewing, we're going to pass the elastic through. So the length of this, the middle one is the length of the elastic is 10 inches, while the length of the down one is 9 inches that I used. So I'll just join it on all sides. Guys, I'll pass the elastic through, and this is what it should look like by the time you're done. Also remember to sew a belt for this particular dress if you want a belt. So by the time you're done passing the elastic through it, this is what the sleeve should look like. And that's basically all for today's tutorial. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and leave a comment, and I'll see you in my next one.